Welcome back. We're wrapping up our discussion on parental rights, especially as it factors in this federal election and in other ways. Joining me again is Celine Traynor. Celine, thanks again for coming on. So there was a recent report that a Canadian pediatrics group is calling on doctors to affirm gender dysphoria for children as young as 6. Tell us what's happening there.
Yes, the Canadian Pediatric Association's flagship journal recently published an article urging doctors to begin gender-affirming care in children as young as 6. Now, there are two forms of transition, if you will. There is social transition and there is medical transition. Social transition includes things like a child wanting to change their name because they identify as the opposite sex, or change their pronouns. They might get a haircut, they might change the way that they express themselves, dress differently, and begin to show interest in other activities, choose different friends, things like that. And so what the Canadian Pediatrics Association is saying is to begin that kind of social transition, begin affirming that social transition in children as young as 6. And then children as young as 12, because they did cite two examples of they gave like case studies. We have a 6-year-old and a 12-year-old. With a 12-year-old, they recommended giving drugs that would suppress menstruation. They recommended things like chest binding, and that, the drug that suppresses menstruation would usually be some kind of puberty blocker, sometimes a form of contraception. And then that would be the first step before they get to cross-sex hormones, which really is beginning the process of medical transition.
And so why should parents care about this?
Well, I think they should care because we should trust doctors. We should be able to trust that doctors have our children's best interest in mind, right? So when doctors are being told by the Canadian Pediatric Association that they should be affirming gender transition in gender dysphoric children, children who have gender confusion, rather than being told to pause and to wait. Because like I said, we have the UK, we have France, Finland, Sweden. We have many medical associations throughout the world, especially in Europe, who are now reporting the emerging science on gender transitions for youth, especially when it comes to puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. So them ignoring that research is extremely irresponsible. And it tells me as a parent that, I have to be careful who I trust when it comes to pediatricians, especially because, if they think it's okay to give a 12-year-old girl a drug that's going to suppress her menstruation, instead of waiting a few years and seeing how she feels, they're giving children drugs that are not completely reversible.
My goodness. Okay, lots to consider there. Should we shift to Manitoba now? It sounds like there's funding of radical gender programs for youth, so that's interesting. But there's a new legislation to make it a crime to not use someone's preferred pronouns. That's interesting because we know that in schools, sometimes children are changing their pronouns without their parental knowledge or consent. And then if they come home and say, well, these are my new pronouns, the parents are like, what? I don't understand what you're talking about. And they say, I guess, dead name them, or whatever they call it. That could be a crime for the parent even.
It could. So this piece of legislation was introduced by the NDP government's Minister of Justice. And it's a bill that essentially proposes to include gender identity and expression in the Human Rights Code of the province. So it's going to protect gender identity and expression. And it says that it includes children. So there is some, vagueness when it comes to what exactly would be the outcome for someone who commits the crime of misgendering or using the wrong pronoun for a child, especially when it comes to parents and teachers, right? So, it's unclear what's going to happen if someone does commit this crime, because it is a crime against the Human Rights Code. The legislation has not passed, to be clear, but if it does, it would be a crime. So it's interesting to me to think, a parent speaking to their child in their own home, and then the child goes and tells the teacher that their parent is misgendering them, that a parent could, be charged with a crime for that. It's definitely a situation of speech being controlled by the government, just like we saw with Bill C-16.
Right, definitely. And in Ontario, it's been part of the Human Rights Code for, I guess, about a decade. So this has kind of been there, done that. And I remember a former government minister, this is under the Premier Kathleen Wynne government, the Minister for Child and Youth Services said it would be considered abuse and the child would then be removed from the home until that abuse stopped. So there is really no room for dialogue, shall we say.
And that's scary stuff for parents.
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot you've given us to consider here, especially as people are heading to the ballot boxes in a few short days on parental rights. Celine, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.